My entitled manager tries to boss and bully me around, all because he saw me as a difficult employee, despite the fact that I have customer service awards, as well as high praise from my previous managers. So I decide to get revenge by exposing him for the awful manager that he is, resulting in several people from my company resigning with me en masse. And I've never felt better about getting back at anybody in my life. Here's what happened. Okay, so for a bit of background, I've worked at my current job for over 3 years. And for most of that time, it has been a small team that is very collaborative, good at listening, and mission focused. Most of this time, I've had a manager by the name of Dylan that is very supportive, listens, and doesn't micromanage. And I've even been applauded and received multiple awards from our customer and directors. And cut to last year in the fall, and we had a huge turnover in management. And in the preceding reorganization, I was moved to be under a different guy by the name of Rick, who is ex-military and is very used to simple sir yes sir responses. He's targeted me and several other employees who voice our opinions in the spirit of improving the overall organization, not just to be difficult or insubordinate. Rick is also super incompetent and poor at time management, and I have to do all of the planning and management for our team and even complete some of his tasks just to keep our organization afloat. Well, last month was evaluation time, and I emailed Rick asking him to involve Dylan in my performance review, since Rick was only my boss for 1 month out of the performance period. Rick refused and wrote me a scathing review that wasn't evidence-based at all. I had sent him multiple references like kudos from the customers and performance awards, and he ensured that I got no raise this year. I complained to HR, and they decided that it needed to be redone with Dylan's involvement. The same day that HR notified everyone of the new plan, Rick came up to me and told me to be careful of how I charge my time, since he noticed I'm away from my desk a lot. And as a side note for context, my job involves collaborating with engineers and engaging with a customer. The next day, he asked me for a list of my current tasks and priorities, as well as deadlines and detailed descriptions of how I perform certain jobs. I went to HR with this information and said it looks suspiciously like retaliation, and they are building a case for firing me. A few days later, I received a written warning for a perceived offense last year, even though there was no real proof from them that I didn't do my job. The timing of everything is very suspicious, and I know that Rick has been investigated and confirmed for creating a hostile work environment for another employee who ended up being relocated to another department to avoid a lawsuit. Fast forward, and I had an interview last week, and I accepted a job offer on Monday. I promptly sent out my notice on Tuesday as my last day, and this is 1 week from a major new system launch. The real kicker here is that I sent out the resignation to the entire company with details about how I was targeted and retaliated against, and how I know I'm not alone in receiving this treatment. I've already heard from multiple coworkers encouraged by my message that were too depressed and stuck to leave that are now looking for other opportunities, and have confirmed that leadership is already having a meltdown. Rick is also being exposed as being completely incompetent, and I was the only other person on his team. The expert staff is about to leave en masse and leave the incompetent leadership to deal with the fallout. I also filled out an exit interview form with even more detail about the situation that will get forwarded from HR up to the directors to see why people are leaving. And honestly, I've never felt better about getting back at somebody in my life. Yeah, Rick was 100% trying to get back at you and was very clearly trying to retaliate for some stupid reason. Like, this guy does not know your work ethic at all. He's just some incompetent manager who's trying to bully you around and get you in trouble for literally no reason. And he's probably only doing this because you're asking questions instead of just walking away and doing exactly as you're told. But how is anybody supposed to get anything done if you're not able to ask questions at work? That sounds really counterintuitive and not like a healthy work environment at all. So good for you for getting back at this manager, because clearly Rick absolutely had it out for you. And I bet if you did decide to stick around, he would only try and find another reason to have you fired. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My entitled mother ruins my wedding day, as she shows up completely intoxicated and eventually storms out of my wedding when I refuse to make the wedding all about her. And now I'm feeling really bad, and I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. So I've been having a really hard time since my wedding the other day. This is kind of a long one, so bear with me. So the morning of my wedding started off good with my mom. She was all fine and dandy, enjoying her morning at the hotel. She told me that she made an appointment at her hotel to get her hair done at 12:30 12:30. Now, I told her my hair and makeup lady would be at my Airbnb at 12 o'clock to help me get ready. Then she started freaking out because she wanted to be there when I was getting ready, but she insisted that she needed to get her hair done. So I told her to either cancel her appointment and come and get ready at the Airbnb, or meet me at my Airbnb at 2 o'clock before we leave for the wedding, or meet me at the chapel at 3 o'clock. She started freaking out on me because she wasn't going to be there for me when I was getting ready. To me, it wasn't even a big deal because everyone was in their own rooms getting ready anyways. She's yelling at me on the phone, telling me how much money she's wasting by being at the hotel and saying that she should be staying at my Airbnb, which, mind you, the only people at the Airbnb were the bridal party, namely me, my husband, his groomsmen, and my bridesmaids. So it wouldn't make sense for her to be there as well. So eventually I get to the chapel and my mom shows up completely drunk. She is saying the most ridiculous things to people and just making a fool out of herself. Meanwhile, I'm basically in a fever dream of excitement, taking pictures with our family before the ceremony. We walk into the chapel and everyone is supposed to go in and sit down so we can start, but she proceeds to dig through a bag to try and give me a gift. I told her I would check it out afterwards because everyone is already in the chapel sitting down. Then she freaks out on me again because I don't want to look at her gifts right then and there. Eventually, the ceremony is over and my now husband and I are so happy, and our photographer takes us to go and take more pictures around the chapel. Eventually, we finish taking pictures and I get back on the party bus to head to the after party, and my mom is not there. I asked my sister what happened, and she said my mom freaked out and took an Uber back to her hotel and left before the after party. The next day comes around and my mom proceeds to text me the worst things I've ever read in my life, basically saying that I embarrassed her and how I'm not her daughter anymore and how my husband is a jerk and that I have a new family and I don't need her, while also saying that she's a bad mother. I literally don't even know where any of that came from, as I was literally busy getting married and barely paid attention to anyone besides my soon-to-be husband in the moment. All I know is that she showed up drunk to my wedding, freaked out, and left, and is now trying to turn it all around on me. I've been feeling awful since then because I wanted my mom to be there to enjoy the day with me, and she had to go and just ruin it. Regardless, I had an amazing day, but it still sucks, and now I feel like I did something wrong even though I know I didn't. No, you definitely did not do anything wrong. You were just trying to have the wedding that you had been looking forward to, but your mom decided to literally make it all about her. She literally ruined that day by being so entitled and spoiled, and that is really not fair for you in the slightest. You did not deserve that, but also it is definitely not your fault. So I think it would be foolish to try and blame yourself at all. Your mom clearly wanted to take away the spotlight from you, and she wanted to try and make this all about her in some kind of weird way. I mean, she showed up drunk and tried to give you a gift before you got married. It's like, what are you doing? I've got to get married first. This really can't wait until the after party. So if I was in your shoes, I would just ignore her completely. She is clearly looking for attention and projecting all of her negative feelings on you, and you do not deserve her entitled attitude in the slightest. An entitled Karen screams at me after I give a homeless guy some money, claiming that I was helping him purchase his illegal substances, and as repayment to society, I was now required to pay for her gas at her pump. So I decided to get some petty revenge in a way that this Karen would never forget. Here's what happened. So we have our fair share of homeless people in my town, and it's a lot of the usual that you might expect, like the ones at the end of exit ramps with signs, or at the lights of highways. Usually I don't give anything because realistically, usually you don't have anything to give in the first place. But yesterday I had a decent day, and I actually found myself with a couple of bucks on hand. I see one particular man at a freeway light often, and I know some of his story. He does use any money collected to purchase food, as well as something to drink but not alcohol, and will accept items graciously, not just cash. So I pull up to the light, wave him over, and hand him the $4 that I had. He thanks me and happens to walk across the intersection to the same gas station that I was heading to in the first place. I go in to get some gas, and he grabs some hot food and a cheap fountain drink. So you might be wondering, all was good, right? Well, no, of course it wasn't. In comes the entitled Karen of the story. She had the typical look and everything. Big sunglasses, the haircut, yoga pants, I mean, you name it. She immediately storms over to the register and demands a manager. I'm only mildly paying attention because I just need to get gas. Well, the manager comes forward, and this woman points that ugly orange and red long nail at me and starts to raise her voice. She says, "I need police here right now. That woman gave that addict some money outside of your establishment," as well as a slew of other really random and ever-growing nonsense. At this point, the three other customers customers, namely me, the man I helped out, and now a very interested customer, are all staring at this Karen. The manager looked so confused, so I chimed in. I said, regardless, that isn't her business. I gave the guy a few bucks across the street, and he's buying food with it. The manager's okay with this, but the Karen is not happy. She starts screaming that obviously the station is a front for illegal activity, as well as illegal substances, as well as all this other crazy stuff. At this point, I've completely lost interest. The man buys his food and walks out, and I get to the register and I ask for gas. Now, you would think that the Karen would be done at this point, but unfortunately, of course she wasn't. She demands that if I'm going to pay for his substances, then I need to buy her gas. She tells the cashier and manager to put, I think, about $40 on the pump where she was at, and it was all going to be on my dime, and then she storms out. And at this point, we all just blink. I chuckled a bit and I told them how much gas I needed, and I was just going to ignore it, but I'm feeling petty, so I put $1 on her pump. Her screaming when the pump stopped at $1 was beautiful, so I got my gas and I left. All the while, she was storming back into the station, and that was honestly the best dollar I've ever wasted in my life. That is seriously the funniest form of petty revenge I've ever heard in a while. Like, first of all, what was this lady's problem? She was seriously freaking out because you gave somebody else money? Like, is she being serious right now? It is not that big of a deal. Like, what you do with what, $4 is your business and yours alone. And it's also really disturbing that she would automatically be like, oh yeah, that guy's going after illegal substances. When it's like, lady, that guy's homeless. He's getting food. She could literally see exactly what he was using the money for. And it's honestly so disappointing that there are actually people like this who see a homeless person and only think that they're doing illegal substances of some kind. And sure, that stereotype in a lot of cases is true, but there are some people who are just down on their luck. And for this guy, it really does seem like the case. So honestly, good for the original poster for putting this Karen in her place, because I really think that's a lesson she's not going to forget anytime soon. An entitled landlord tries to trick me into renting their apartment as they failed to disclose that I would be next to a neighbor who was an absolute nightmare to deal with. And I've honestly never been more offended or bullied by somebody in my life. Here's what happened. Okay, so after apartment searching for several months, I finally found a place that looked reasonable. Currently, I've been living with my elderly dad, caretaking for him as he has some mobility issues and some health issues. I've been doing so for the last year. Prior to that, I was living in an apartment and basically put my life on hold to help him out. My mom passed away several years ago unexpectedly, and since then, I've tried to help my dad, even though at times he can have some narcissism, which has added to the difficulty of me caretaking and living with him. It's not all the times, but it is sometimes. I had been apartment searching for months, and I had very little luck. It seems like everything was either extremely expensive in my area, or too far distance-wise, or it just didn't look great. Or on the flip side, no one got back to me with my original inquiry. Finally, I found a place that was only 20 minutes away from my dad, in a town that I do like, right on the beach for a reasonable price. It was a studio apartment, so it was relatively small in size, but it definitely seemed doable. When I went to go see it the first time, the current tenant was the one to show it to me. She seemed really nice and said it's a good apartment and that she's going to be living with her mom for the time being, and then in the summer she's going to be moving to Arizona. When we were walking out, I saw that there were papers on the neighbor's door and she mentioned they are being evicted. I didn't feel comfortable asking follow-up questions or prying, which in retrospect I definitely should have. So I decided that I wanted to take the apartment. I speak to the landlord who lives in a different state via phone call, and she tells me about the paperwork application I will need to fill out and that everything looks good. Her sister works in the office downstairs and handles a lot of paperwork, so I met her as well. I had asked her for a copy of the lease just so I could look it over prior to putting down a deposit. I do so, and I notice one of the things on the deposit was very unusual. It mentioned repairs in the building, but that the tenant would be responsible for $50 of the repair, even if it were part of the building and not something that they caused. I was very confused by the wording, and I asked her to elaborate on that, and she did so. I then told her I'm very interested, and I would like to take a final walkthrough and bring my non-refundable holding deposit at that point if everything seemingly looks good, which I ended up doing so at that point. Everything about the apartment looked good and reasonable. I put down the holding deposit, which is the amount of the rent, and she gives me a copy of the lease that I then have to get notarized, which I found it to be unusual, and I also found it unusual that the holding deposit and the security deposit she wanted in cash only. She said rent going forward could be in check form, but that she wanted those in cash. Well, fast forward, and I go back back today and I bring the lease signed and notarized, as well as the security deposit in cash. I meet with the sister of the landlord in the office, and after she signs the documents and takes the money from me, we start having a conversation, and she's telling me about the area and the building in general. She then gets on about the layout of the neighbors, detailing exactly where everybody lives. I tell her that it's okay if she doesn't feel comfortable sharing, but I'm just curious about the person being evicted. Well, she then goes on a 20-minute conversation about how that woman has been a complete nightmare, how she was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, and apparently that's why the current tenant is moving out, and other tenants have had a huge noise issue with her. She blasts music constantly. She's rude when they asked her to turn it down. She vacuums for 3 hours, banging her vacuum into the wall, especially when people have work meetings when they work from home. And after hearing this, I was extremely concerned. I tell her thank you for her time, and then I go to my car and I call my dad. I burst into tears because I felt so uncomfortable with finding out this information, especially after signing the lease and putting down the money. He tells me that I should go back in and ask her why that wasn't disclosed to me prior to signing anything. So I go back in and I say just that to the sister, and she says to me in response that the current tenant did tell me, but I tell her that I knew of the person being evicted, but I had no clue as to why, and I'm very uncomfortable with this information. She then calls her sister, the landlord, and puts me on the phone with her. The landlord then basically verbally attacks me, turning things around on me, saying that I have been wishy-washy the entire time, that I'm going to regret this, that it's a cute apartment and by the ocean, and that she has never in her 52 years of doing this had someone be so wishy-washy. Now, I feel very uncomfortable because I have a passive personality, which she probably knew she could take advantage of, and I asked her how I've been wishy-washy at all. She said because I wanted clarification of the lease and to see the apartment for a second time. Now, when she said that, I still felt incredibly uncomfortable with this scenario. She was still trying to push me to keep and take the apartment at that point, even though I tried to explain to her that I've had a really bad neighbor scenario before, and it was an absolute nightmare for me living in that. She tried to tell me that this would not be an issue, in that they were already evicting the person, and the person might even be out by the time I move in next month. I told her that I knew sometimes evictions could take months or even up to a year, and I can't be in that kind of scenario. Well, long story short, I pretty much burst into tears after getting off the phone with her, even though I was still in front of her sister. I left, I told my dad what happened, and he told me to give him her number so he could give her a call back and speak about the deposit and getting it back. He did so, and she lied, saying that I knew about this when I first saw the apartment, which is obviously untrue. It sounds like if she's going to have to be able to have a backup tenant and rent it right away, that she will get the money back, otherwise it might be an issue. I'm extremely on edge, and I'm very uncomfortable about this entire thing. I've never been spoken to like that in my life, and I'm also extremely disappointed about not getting this apartment after searching for months. I felt like going into it though might be the wrong decision if I pretty much have confirmation that this neighbor has been a living nightmare for literally anybody who lives there. On the other hand, I obviously understand why the current tenant is trying to break her lease, because they wouldn't even tell me the details of why the eviction is happening in the first place. It's just very upsetting that I was about to move into a scenario that seems like it was a very difficult living situation for reasons outside of the apartment. I mean, I really felt like I was being bullied, and I was so shocked because this landlord's attitude just changed 180 from the previous time I'd spoken to her, and it's honestly just so jarring. And it's also one of those situations where I wonder if it was too good to be true. And you know what? Maybe it is. This place was right on the beach, and it just seemed like a really low price, and obviously and unfortunately, I now know that there was clearly a catch. Yeah, that landlord tried to muscle you into that apartment, and that is honestly so crazy to me. Like, I've learned in customer service or in other situations in life, whenever somebody gets really pushy and aggressive and like angry with you, especially over a decision that involves money or something like that, usually it means that they're trying to like get something out of you, or they have some kind of angle that they're trying to play against you. And the entitled Karen landlord of this story absolutely fits the bill. I mean, you are definitely not the first person to see that eviction notice on your neighbor's door and then think to yourself, okay, maybe this is not for me, because that landlord turned on a dime and was like, no, this is your fault. You've been wishy-washy. And it's like, what do you even mean by wishy-washy? That literally doesn't even make any sense. And also, why would I not want to be very careful about the place I live in? Because this is a perfect example of what could happen. They advertise this low price, it's right next to the beach, so they're clearly trying to like pull people in to make sure they get with this property, but in reality, it's all a ruse. It's all a disguise so that they can get this apartment under somebody so that they can start making money off of it despite this awful neighbor. And the original poster had it right as well. This eviction process sometimes goes on forever. Like, that's never an easy process, and there's a good chance she might just stay there and be like, nope, I'm not gonna leave. Then the police are involved and all this other garbage is just gonna add up. Like, seriously, that sounds like an absolute abysmal nightmare. So seriously, good for you for not moving into that place, as well as having your dad to back you up when you felt overwhelmed, because having someone like that to help you out in this scenario clearly made all the difference in the world. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.